He had accepted the darkness. At 34, Aiden Costa, head of the city's most feared syndicate, was going blind. The doctors called it a rapid, untreatable degeneration. His devoted wife, Camilla, spoon-fed him her special broths, weeping softly at his bedside. He thought he was a dying king, blessed with an angel. Until a 6-year-old girl tugged at his sleeve and whispered the words that shattered his world. "You're not blind, mister. Your wife is putting powder in your food." Blindness did not arrive like a curtain dropping over a stage. It did not offer the mercy of sudden, absolute blackness. For Aiden Costa, it came as a slow, suffocating fog. It started 3 months ago with a blurring at the edges of his peripheral vision. He had ignored it, chalking it up to exhaustion. The endless nights managing the docks, the stress of keeping 4 rival families from tearing his territory apart. But then the fog thickened. The sharp, tailored lines of his suits lost their crispness in the mirror. The faces of his lieutenants across the heavy oak boardroom table turned into smudged, featureless ovals. Now, sitting in the deep leather armchair of his private study, Aiden could only see light and shadow. The grand window to his right was a glowing, indistinct rectangle. The fire in the hearth was a trembling orange blur. He was 34 years old. He had built his empire on his ability to read a room, to catch the subtle, nervous twitch in a man's jaw, the slight hesitation before a lie. Without his eyes, he was a predator, stripped of its teeth. "Aiden, darling." The door opened, and the scent of rosewater and expensive jasmine drifted into the room. Camilla. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor. Even without seeing her, Aiden could picture her perfectly. She had the kind of sharp, cold beauty that stopped conversations. When they married 5 years ago, a union that solidified peace between his faction and the western suburbs, he had thought of her as a strategic asset. Over time, as she stood by him through gang wars and federal indictments, she had become his anchor. "You're sitting in the dark again," she murmured. The leather couch groaned as she sat beside him. Her hand, cool and soft, found his cheek. "The light gives me a headache," Aiden lied. The truth was, the light only reminded him of what he could no longer see. "I brought your tea," Camilla said, her voice dropping to that soothing maternal register she had adopted ever since the specialist told him there was nothing they could do. Idiopathic optic neuropathy, they had called it. A rapid, aggressive degradation of the optic nerve, rare, tragic, and permanent. Aiden heard the soft clink of china being set on the side table. "Drink it while it's hot, Aiden." The herbalist promised this blend reduces inflammation. Aiden reached out, his fingers brushing the empty air before finding the warm ceramic of the saucer. He brought the cup to his lips. The tea smelled earthy, bitter, masked heavily by the scent of peppermint and something that reminded him of wet ash. He hated the taste. It left a metallic coating on his tongue and made his stomach churn. But he swallowed it anyway. He drank it because he heard the genuine tremor of fear in Camilla's voice when he refused, and because a man losing everything else clings to the devotion of his wife. "Good," she whispered, her finger stroking his hair. "I just want you to get better." "I'm not getting better, Cam," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Dr. Aris was clear." "Doctors don't know everything," she replied sharply, the softness momentarily vanishing before she caught herself. She kissed his forehead. "Rest. I have to go over the payroll with Tommy. Someone has to keep the men in line while you recover." Aiden stiffened. Tommy can bring the books to me. I can still listen." "You need your strength," Camilla insisted, her tone brooking no argument. "I'm just reading the numbers to 'em, Aiden, making sure they don't cheat us. You know they try when they think you aren't looking." "When they think he isn't looking." The words stung, but they were true. "Fine," he conceded, leaning back against the leather. "Send Sarah in to build up the fire." "Of course, darling." Her heels clicked away. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut. 10 minutes later, the door creaked open again. The footsteps this time were entirely different, heavier, hesitant, wearing sensible rubber-soled shoes. Sarah, the new housekeeper, and trailing just behind her, the patter of a much lighter skipping step. "Mr. Costa?" Sarah's voice was nervous. She was a widow, struggling to keep afloat, whom Aiden had hired a month ago simply because Camilla complained the house was too large to manage while caring for him. "The fire, Sarah," Aiden said, staring straight ahead into the gray void. "Right away, sir." As Sarah swept the hearth and added fresh logs, Aiden heard the distinct sound of a small wooden object dropping onto the rug. "Mia," Sarah hissed in a harsh whisper. "Pick that up. Don't bother the boss." Aiden turned his head slightly toward the sound. Mia, Sarah's 6-year-old daughter. She was a quiet ghost of a child who spent her afternoons in the corners of the vast estate while her mother worked. Aiden didn't mind her. Her innocent, entirely uncalculated presence was a relief in a house filled with hardened criminals and anxious tension. "It's fine," Aiden said. "She's not bothering me." He heard the child shuffle closer. She didn't speak. She just stood there, somewhere near his knee. Aiden reached into his vest pocket, where he always kept a wrapped butterscotch candy. It was an old habit from when he used to visit the orphanages in his territory. He held it out into the empty air. A tiny, warm hand brushed his knuckles. She took the candy. He heard the crinkle of the cellophane wrapper. "Thank you," a small, reedy voice whispered. Aiden offered a faint, grim smile. It was the only honest interaction he had had all day. 2 weeks passed, and the fog in Aiden's eyes settled into a permanent, oppressive gray wall. The headaches grew worse, accompanied by a strange, creeping lethargy that made his limbs feel like they were stuffed with lead. But the physical decay was nothing compared to the slow hemorrhage of his authority. He sat in the study, his self-imposed prison, listening to the muffled sounds of his own syndicate operating just beyond the door. Camilla had moved his operations from the downtown club to the estate, claiming it was for his safety. At first, his capos came directly to him. They would sit in the leather chairs, uncomfortable and shifting, reporting on the docks, the unions, the protection rackets. But Aiden could not read the ledgers. He couldn't verify the manifests. He couldn't see the sweat on a man's brow to know if he was skimming. Camilla had stepped in to assist. She started by reading the documents aloud. Then she began filtering the information. "Aiden is too tired today," he would hear her say in the hallway. "Leave the reports with me. I'll summarize them for him." He allowed it. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself Camilla was protecting his image. The sharks in the underworld would tear him apart if they saw how truly helpless he had become. Camilla, with her cold efficiency, was keeping the sharks at bay. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Tommy, his underboss, was allowed into the study. Aiden sat perfectly still, hands resting on the gold-plated head of his walking cane. It was a prop. He didn't need it to walk around a room he had memorized, but he used it to project an image of grounded stability. "The Port Authority is pressing us, boss," Tommy said. His voice, usually booming and confident, sounded cautious, too cautious. "They want a bigger cut to look the other way on the shipping containers from the east side. 20% increase." Aiden frowned. "Tell them to go to hell. We own the customs inspectors. If the commissioner wants more money, he can find it in the city budget." There was silence. Aiden strained his ears, listening for Tommy's reaction. He heard the scrape of a shoe, a nervous clearing of the throat. "Aiden," Camilla's voice chimed in. She was sitting by the window. He hadn't realized she was still in the room. "If we push back on the Port Authority right now, we risk a strike. The eastern shipments are crucial this month. Paying the 20% secures the route." "It sets a precedent," Aiden snapped, his pride flaring. "We don't negotiate from weakness." "We aren't weak," Camilla said smoothly. "We are pragmatic. Tommy, authorize the increase. But tell the commissioner this buys his absolute silence for the next 6 months." "Wait," Aiden started. "Done, Mrs. Costa," Tommy said quickly. There was relief in his voice. He didn't want a war. He wanted the easy way out, and he had just taken an order from the boss's wife. "Tommy," Aiden said, his voice dropping an octave, a lethal edge creeping into the tone. "Aiden, please," Camilla interrupted, walking over and placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your blood pressure. Let Tommy handle the logistics. You need to focus on healing." Aiden felt a surge of rage, but the heavy, sickening fatigue washed over him, dulling his anger. His head throbbed. "Dismiss Tommy?" Aiden muttered. He heard the underboss leave. Camilla lingered, massaging his shoulders. "I'm only trying to help you, my love. Everything I do is to keep your throne intact, for when you are ready to take it back." Aiden didn't answer. He just leaned heavily on his cane, staring into the gray. An hour later, the study was quiet again. Camilla had gone to take a meeting with the family lawyers. Aiden was dozing in his chair, the lethargy pulling him under, when he heard the familiar quiet scuff of small shoes. "Mia," he said softly, not opening his eyes. The footsteps stopped. "You have good ears, Mr. Aiden. When you lose your eyes, the ears have to work double time," he said. He reached into his pocket and held out a piece of butterscotch. He heard her approach. She took the candy, but she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she stood close to his chair. He could smell the faint scent of laundry soap and the metallic tang of rain on her clothes. "My mom says I shouldn't talk to you because you're resting," Mia said. "I'm awake." There was a long pause. Aiden heard the faint clinking of glass from the side table. "Why do you drink the smelly soup?" Mia asked suddenly. Aiden sighed. "It's medicine, kid. It's supposed to make me better." "It smells bad. It tastes worse. Does it make you sleepy?" Aiden frowned. "Yeah, sometimes. My mom says medicine is supposed to make you strong, not sleepy," Mia observed with the profound, simple logic of a child. Aiden chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Your mom is a smart woman. But my sickness, it's complicated. Run along now, Mia. Don't let your mother catch you bothering me." He heard her skip away, but her question lingered in the dark corners of his mind. "Medicine is supposed to make you strong." Aiden rubbed his temples. He was just tired. He was letting paranoia, the occupational hazard of a Mafia boss, get the better of him. Camilla loved him. She was his wife. She was the only one standing between him and total ruin. He had to trust her. He had no one else. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. It was Thursday, the day Aiden dreaded the most. Thursdays meant Dr. Aries would call with updates that were never updates, just polite reaffirmations of his permanent blindness. And Thursdays meant Camilla made her special marrow and herb soup. Aiden sat at the small dining table in his private suite. He traced the grain of the mahogany wood with his fingertips, committing the texture to memory. "Here we are," Camilla said, bustling into the room. The heavy, metallic, earthy smell of the soup preceded her. It hit Aiden's stomach like a physical blow. He heard the bowl slide onto the placemat in front of him. "I can't eat today, Cam," Aiden said, turning his head away. "I have no appetite." "Aiden, you have to," Camilla said, her voice dropping into that sweet, chiding tone. "You're losing weight. The herbs in this are imported. They stimulate nerve repair. Please, for me?" Aiden felt her hand cup his jaw. Her thumb stroked his cheekbone. He hated the vulnerability of it. He hated that he had to rely on her to guide the spoon if his hands shook too badly from the fatigue. "Leave it," he said firmly. "I'll eat it in a minute." "It needs to be eaten hot," she insisted. She picked up the heavy silver spoon. He could hear it scrape the bottom of the porcelain bowl. "Come on, just a few bites." Before she could press the spoon to his lips, a sharp trilling sound interrupted them. Camilla's cell phone. Aiden heard her huff in annoyance. "It's the union rep. I told him not to call me on this line." She set the spoon down with a clatter. "Eat, Aiden. I'll be right back. I just need to handle this." "Take your time," Aiden murmured. He listened as her heels clicked rapidly out of the room. The door shut with a solid thud. Aiden was alone. He sat in the gray silence, the smell of the soup turning his stomach. He reached out blindly, his fingers finding the edge of the bowl. It was hot. He thought about pushing it off the table, blaming it on a clumsy accident. Then he heard it. A soft scrape. The shifting of fabric. Someone was in the room. Aiden froze. His hand crept instinctively toward the holster hidden beneath his tailored jacket, his heart hammering against his ribs. Someone had slipped past his guards. Someone was in his private suite. "Who's there?" Aiden demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "It's just me," a tiny voice whispered. Aiden exhaled sharply, dropping his hand from his gun. "Mia, Jesus, kid. You shouldn't sneak up on people in this house. It's dangerous." "I was hiding," she said. Her voice was much closer now. She must have been under the large display cabinet in the corner. "Why?" "Because the pretty lady is mean to my mom." Aiden frowned. "Camilla?" "She yells when my mom doesn't clean the kitchen fast enough. And she told the big man with the scar that he's stupid." Tommy. Camilla had called Tommy stupid. Aiden felt a knot tighten in his chest, but he pushed it down. "Adults get stressed, Mia." Aiden heard the soft patter of her shoes as she walked right up to his chair. He could hear her breathing. She was standing right next to him, staring at the table. "She makes the soup in the kitchen," Mia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know. She cooks it herself." "But she doesn't use the salt from the cabinet." Aiden went perfectly still. "What do you mean?" "I was hiding under the island," Mia said, the words spilling out quickly, as if she knew she shouldn't be saying them, but couldn't hold them in. She took a little glass bottle out of her purse. It had white powder in it. She put 3 scoops in your soup and then stirred it really fast. Then she put the bottle back in her purse. The silence in the room became absolute. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a judge's gavel striking a block. "A powder?" Aiden asked. His voice didn't sound like his own. It sounded hollow, distant. "Yes, it looked like sugar, but she didn't put it in her own bowl. Only yours." Mia paused. "You're not blind, mister. Your wife is putting powder in your food." Aiden's brain, slowed by weeks of lethargy and grief, suddenly fired with a violently sharp, agonizing clarity. The timeline. His vision had started blurring precisely when Camilla fired the old chef and insisted on cooking for him to ensure he maintained a healthy diet during a stressful gang dispute. The fatigue, the metallic taste, the way the doctors couldn't identify the cause of his optic nerve degeneration, the way she intercepted his lieutenants, took over the ledgers, authorized payments to the Port Authority. She wasn't keeping his throne warm for him. She was stealing it. And she was poisoning him to do it. Aiden's hands began to shake, not from fatigue, but from a rage so pure, so absolute, it felt like ice water flooding his veins. He had trusted her. He had let her strip him of his pride, his autonomy, his sight, believing all the while she was his savior. "Mia," Aiden said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" "Yes, Mr. Aiden, I promise." "Okay." Aiden reached out, navigating by memory, and found the heavy porcelain bowl of soup. He picked it up. He felt for the large potted ficus plant that sat to the right of the table. He leaned over and carefully, quietly, poured the entire contents of the bowl into the soil. He placed the empty bowl back on the placemat. "Mia, listen to me very carefully," Aiden whispered, leaning down toward where he knew the child was standing. "You cannot tell anyone what you just told me. Not your mother, not the guards, nobody. Do you understand? Are you going to be mad at the pretty lady?" "No," Aiden said, the lie slipping effortlessly past his teeth. "It's just a secret between us. A game. Can you keep a secret?" "Yes." "Good girl. Go hide again. She's coming back." Aiden heard the quick, light footsteps dart across the room, followed by the soft rustle of fabric as Mia slid back under the cabinet. A moment later, the door handle turned. Camilla walked back in, her phone sliding into her pocket. "Sorry about that, darling. The union is getting greedy." She walked over to the table. Aiden heard her stop. "You ate it," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and profound satisfaction. Aiden wiped his mouth with his linen napkin. He looked up, staring directly into the gray fog where he knew her face was. "I did," Aiden said smoothly. "Every last drop. You were right, Cam. I think I'm starting to feel it working." The next 48 hours were a masterclass in deception. Aiden Costa, a man who had built his reputation on brutal, uncompromising honesty, became a ghost in his own life. The mechanics of survival required absolute discipline. When Camilla brought the morning tea, he held the cup, warming his hands, and waited for her to turn her back to check her phone or adjust the curtains. The moment she was distracted, the liquid went into the heavy brass spittoon by the desk, or the soil of the ferns. When she spoon-fed him the evening broth, he feigned a coughing fit, taking the bowl from her hands under the guise of sparing her dress from spills, and systematically emptied it into a concealed flask he kept tucked inside his jacket. Later, he would flush it down the bathroom sink, running the water until the pipes rinsed clean of the metallic stench. But stopping the poison was only the first step. The withdrawal was a private, agonizing hell. By Friday night, his body realized it was being denied the chemical tether that had kept it subdued. Aidan lay in his bed, his muscles locked in rigid, involuntary spasms. Cold sweat soaked his high-thread count sheets. A dull, rhythmic pounding started at the base of his skull and radiated behind his useless eyes. He bit down on a rolled-up leather belt to keep his teeth from chattering, terrified that the noise would draw Camilla from her adjoining bedroom. He had to stay weak. He had to remain the dying king. Around 3 a.m, the violent shaking finally subsided, leaving him hollowed out and exhausted. But as he lay staring up into the dark, he noticed something. The suffocating, uniform gray fog that had covered his vision for weeks was no longer uniform. It was a subtle shift. The darkness in the room wasn't just a blank wall. It had texture. He turned his head toward the large bay windows. He couldn't see the glass, nor the trees outside, but he could detect a faint rectangular contrast. The moonlight bleeding through the curtains was registering on his optic nerves. A bruised, muddy silhouette of light. He wasn't permanently broken. The doctors had been wrong, or more likely bought off. Aidan sat up, throwing his legs over the edge of the mattress. His bare feet hit the cold hardwood floor. He needed an ally. He could not run a counter-coup from a sickbed relying solely on the word of a 6-year-old girl. He mentally cataloged the men stationed in and around the estate. Tommy, his underboss, was compromised. If Camilla was making decisions and authorizing payments, she had done it by bringing Tommy to heel. The exterior guards were loyal to the payroll, and currently, Camilla controlled the payroll. He needed someone old school, someone whose loyalty predated Camilla. Leo. Leo was a 60-year-old enforcer who had driven for Aidan's father. He possessed a bad left knee and a quiet, brooding demeanor. 2 months ago, Camilla had deemed Leo too rough around the edges for the indoor security detail and relegated him to managing the motor pool at the far end of the property. It was an insult disguised as a promotion. Aidan stood up. His legs trembled, weak from fasting and withdrawal, but they held. He reached for his cane, not for weight, but to trace the perimeter of the room. He navigated to the heavy oak wardrobe, running his fingers over the garments until he found his thick cashmere overcoat. He slipped out of his bedroom door. The hallway was silent, save for the faint humps of the central heating. He knew the patrol routes. The night guards did a sweep of the west wing every hour on the hour. It was 3:15 a.m. He had 45 minutes. Aidan walked down the grand staircase, gripping the banister. He counted the steps. 14, 15, landing. Turn left. 12 more. He reached the kitchen, slipped through the service door, and stepped out into the biting October night air. The sudden chill slapped his face, sharpening his senses. He moved across the stone patio, keeping his left hand brushing against the brick exterior of the house to guide him toward the garages. The gravel driveway crunched softly under his slippers. He paused, listening for the heavy tread of the perimeter guards. Only the wind rustling through the oaks answered him. He found the side door of the garage and pushed it open. The smell of motor oil, gasoline, and stale coffee hit him. "Stop right there!" A gravelly voice snapped from the darkness. The distinct metallic slide of a pump-action shotgun chambering around echoed in the cavernous space. Aidan didn't flinch. "If you're going to shoot me, Leo, Aim high. I don't want an open casket. Silence. Then, the heavy thud of the shotgun being lowered to the concrete. A flashlight beam clicked on, hitting Aiden's chest, taking care to avoid his sensitive eyes. Boss? Leo's voice was a mixture of shock and profound confusion. What the hell are you doing out here? It's freezing. Where's your nurse? My nurse is asleep, Aiden said, stepping further into the garage. Turn the light off, Leo. We need to talk. And I need to know if you're still my man, or if you take your orders from my wife now. The flashlight clicked off immediately. I take my orders from the man who bled for this family, Leo said, the gruffness in his voice hardening into absolute certainty. What do you need, Mr. Costa? I need a rat trap, Aiden said quietly. A big one. By Sunday, the physical fog in Aiden's head had completely lifted. His mind was sharp, calculating, and ruthless. His vision, though still severely impaired, was slowly returning. The muddy silhouettes had sharpened into distinct outlines. He could tell the difference between a chair and a person. He could see the stark contrast of a dark suit against a pale wall. He still couldn't read a document or make out facial features, but he was no longer drowning in the dark. He kept this entirely to himself. To the rest of the house, he was Aiden the invalid. He let his head loll slightly when he sat in his armchair. He allowed his hands to tremble when he reached for a glass of water. He stared blankly at walls while actually tracking the movements of the people in the room. Leo had been busy. Operating completely off the books, the old enforcer had taken the hidden flask of tainted soup to an underground toxicologist. The results came back within 24 hours. Thallium. Colorless, odorless, tasteless. A heavy metal often used in rat poison. It caused severe neurological damage, muscle weakness, and crucially, optic neuritis. Gradual blindness. If ingested over a long period, it resulted in a slow, untraceable organ failure that looked exactly like natural degradation. Camilla wasn't just stealing his throne. She was murdering him, drop by drop, while playing the grieving, devoted wife. That afternoon, Aiden sat in his study. The fire was roaring, casting flickering orange outlines against his recovering retinas. Camilla had excused herself to the parlor down the hall, claiming she needed to review the weekly ledgers with Tommy. Aiden waited 5 minutes. Then he stood up. He didn't take his cane. A cane made noise. He walked in his socks, placing his heel down first, rolling silently to his toes. A trick he had learned as a young street soldier creeping through rival warehouses. He moved out of the study and down the long corridor, sticking close to the wall, where the floorboards were supported by the joists and less likely to creak. He approached the parlor. The heavy double doors were pulled shut, but a thin sliver of light spilled from the gap in the center. Aiden pressed his shoulder against the door frame and leaned his ear toward the crack. "Moving too slow, Cam." Tommy's voice carried through the wood, pitched low and tight with anxiety. "The Eastern families are asking questions. Sullivan wants a face-to-face with Aiden by the end of the month. I can't keep telling them the boss is resting." "Sullivan is a dinosaur," Camilla replied, her tone dismissive, laced with the sharp arrogance Aiden once found intoxicating. "Let him ask questions. By the end of the month, it won't matter." "It matters if they think we're weak," Tommy pressed. Aiden heard the clinking of ice against crystal. Tommy was drinking his good scotch. "We need the signature on the succession proxy. If Aiden signs over the voting rights to me while he recovers, the families will fall in line." "He'll sign it," Camilla said smoothly. "His hands are shaking worse today." He can barely hold a cup. He's tired, Tommy. He wants the burden lifted. I'll present it as temporary power of attorney. He trusts me completely." A brief silence followed, broken by the sound of fabric rustling and a heavy sigh. "You're sure Dr. Aris won't talk?" Tommy asked, his voice suddenly much softer, closer. "Aris likes his gambling debts paid." "He won't say a word," Camilla murmured. "Once Aiden signs the paper tomorrow, I'll double the dose in his evening tea. His heart will simply give out in his sleep. A tragic complication of his illness. The city mourns, and we take over." Aiden stood frozen in the hallway. His chest tightened, a cold, venomous pressure wrapping around his ribs. Tommy wasn't just a compromised underboss taking orders from a domineering wife. They were partners. They were killing him together. He imagined Tommy standing there, his hands on Camilla, drinking his liquor, planning his funeral. The utter indignity of it threatened to break his carefully maintained composure. He wanted to kick the doors open. He wanted to feel the satisfying, brutal impact of his fists against Tommy's jaw. But Aiden was a strategist. If he killed them now, behind closed doors, without proof that the other capos would accept, it would look like the paranoid, violent outburst of a sick man. Tommy's loyalists in the syndicate would retaliate. It would spark a civil war that would burn his empire to the ground. He didn't just want to kill them. He wanted to dismantle them. Aiden backed away from the door, silent as a shadow, and retreated to his study. He sat back down in the heavy leather armchair, arranged his face into a mask of exhausted defeat, and waited for his wife to return. 20 minutes later, the door handle clicked. Camilla walked in, carrying a silver tray. "Aiden, darling," she cooed, her voice practically dripping with artificial warmth. "I brought you a fresh cup of tea. And some good news." Aiden turned his head slowly, letting his eyes stare vacantly past her left shoulder. "Good news?" he rasped. "Tommy and I have been going over the logistics," she said, setting the tray down. "The stress of the business is hindering your recovery. The doctors agree. We've drawn up some paperwork, a temporary proxy. It just lets Tommy handle the day-to-day operations officially, so the other families stop pressing us." She knelt beside his chair, placing a cool hand over his. "It takes the weight off your shoulders, my love. Just until you're better." Aiden let a heavy dramatic sigh escape his lungs. He slumped slightly in the chair. "I don't know, Cam. Handing over power, it makes me look weak." "It makes you look smart," she corrected gently. "You're preserving your strength. Please, Aiden. For me. For us." Aiden stayed quiet for a long moment, letting the tension build, playing the part of the reluctant, beaten man to perfection. "All right," he whispered finally, "if you think it's best." He saw the blurry outline of her posture shift, a subtle, immediate release of tension. Triumph. "I do," she smiled. "I'll have the lawyers prepare the final draft for tomorrow evening." "No," Aiden said softly. Camilla stiffened. "No. If I'm handing over the reins, even temporarily, it needs to be done right," Aiden said, projecting a raspy, stubborn pride. "I won't do it in the dark, hiding like a coward. Call Sullivan, Hayes, Mitchell, and Carter. Invite them to dinner tomorrow night. I'll sign the proxy in front of the family heads. Let them see that I am making this choice with a clear mind." Camilla hesitated. Aiden could almost hear the gears turning in her head. A private signing was safer, easier to manipulate. But a public endorsement in front of the four most powerful capos? It would legitimize Tommy's rule instantly. No one could ever question the succession if the top bosses witnessed it. Her greed eclipsed her caution. "That's a brilliant idea, Aiden," she said softly. "It will show them absolute unity. I'll make the calls tonight." "Thank you, Cam," Aiden murmured, leaning back and closing his eyes. "What would I do without you?" The kitchen was a flurry of chaotic energy. Monday evening had arrived, and Sarah, the housekeeper, was terrified. Mrs. Costa had ordered a formal dinner for 6 of the most dangerous men in the city, with barely 24 hours' notice. Sarah was frantically polishing silverware, while the private chef Camilla had hired yelled instructions at the prep cooks. In the corner, sitting quietly on a wooden stool with a coloring book, was Mia. Aiden stepped into the kitchen. The noise immediately died down. The chef froze mid-shout. Sarah dropped a silver spoon, which clattered loudly against the tile. "Mr. Costa," Sarah gasped, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sir, you shouldn't be in here. The floor is wet." Aiden leaned heavily on his cane. Through his recovering vision, the kitchen was a bright, blurry painting of stainless steel and white tiles. "I'm fine, Sarah. I just needed to stretch my legs before the guests arrive. Can you fetch Leo for me? I need him to bring my good watch from the safe." "Right away, sir," Sarah said, hurrying out the service doors. The chef and cooks, thoroughly intimidated by the blind boss standing silently in their workspace, found reasons to scurry into the pantry. Aiden turned his head toward the corner where he knew the wooden stool was. "Mia," he said quietly. He heard the slide of a crayon on paper stop. "Hi, Mr. Aiden." "Come here, kid." She hopped off the stool and padded over to him. "You look nice," she whispered. "You're wearing a suit." "I have important guests coming," Aiden said. He reached into his pocket, bypassing the butterscotch, and pulled out a crisp, folded $100 bill. He held it out. Mia didn't take it. "My mom says I can't take money from people." "This isn't a gift, Mia. It's payment for a job," Aiden said, his tone serious, treating her not as a child, but as an associate. "I need you to do something very important for me tonight, but it requires you to be brave." "Like a spy?" she asked, her voice hitching with cautious excitement. "Exactly like a spy. Do you know where the pretty lady keeps her purse when she's downstairs?" "In the hallway closet, next to the big mirror." "Good. During dinner, while everyone is in the dining room, I need you to go into that closet. I need you to find the little glass bottle with the white powder inside. Bring it to Leo. He will be waiting by the back door." Mia hesitated. "Will the pretty lady yell at me?" "The pretty lady won't even know it's gone until it's too late," Aiden promised softly. "And if anyone asks, you are under my absolute protection. Nobody touches you or your mother in this house. Understand?" "Okay," Mia said, taking the bill. "I'll get it." "Good girl." Aiden turned and slowly navigated his way back toward the main hall. The trap was set. At 7 o'clock sharp, the heavy mahogany doors of the estate opened to admit the 4 capos, Sullivan, Hayes, Mitchell, and Carter. They were men of violence wrapped in expensive tailoring, carrying the distinct aura of power and suspicion. They greeted Camilla with polite, guarded nods and cast appraising, calculating looks at Tommy. When Aiden was led into the dining room on Camilla's arm, the room went dead silent. He played his part flawlessly. He dragged his left foot slightly. He stared blankly into the middle distance. When Sullivan, a towering man with a voice like grinding stones, greeted him, Aiden turned his head a few degrees off-center to reply, projecting the tragic inaccuracy of the blind. "Good to see you, Aiden," Sullivan grunted, pulling out his chair. though I wish the circumstances were better. We deal with the hand we're dealt, John, Aidan said, allowing Tommy to guide him into the heavy high-backed chair at the head of the table. Dinner commenced. It was a masterclass in tension. Camilla played the gracious hostess, pouring wine, seamlessly steering the conversation away from syndicate business and toward Aidan's courageous battle. Tommy sat to Aidan's right, exuding a quiet, swelling confidence. He was already acting like the boss, nodding at the capos, making small, authoritative gestures. As the plates were cleared for dessert, Camilla stood up. She tapped her crystal wine glass with a silver spoon. The gentle ringing commanded the room's attention. "Gentlemen," Camilla began, her voice a perfect blend of sorrow and resolve. "Thank you for coming. You all know that Aidan's health has been declining. His vision is gone, and the physical toll of his illness requires him to rest. But Aidan's primary concern has always been and will always be the strength of the family." She gestured to Tommy, who produced a thick legal document from a leather portfolio and laid it flat on the mahogany table in front of Aidan. He placed an expensive fountain pen next to it. "To ensure absolute stability," Camilla continued, "Aidan has drafted a proxy. It temporarily transfers his voting rights and operational authority to Tommy. We invited you here tonight to witness his signature, so there can be no whispers, no doubts about the transition." The four capos looked at the document, then at Aidan. "You sure about this, Aidan?" Carter asked, his brow furrowed. "Tommy's a good earner, but running the whole board—" "I've made my decision," Aidan said softly. He slowly reached his hand out, his fingers fumbling across the smooth wood of the table until they brushed against the parchment. He felt for the pen. His hand shook. It was a masterful performance of physical frailty. He picked up the pen. He hovered the gold nib over the signature line. Camilla held her breath. Tommy leaned forward slightly, anticipation radiating from him like heat from a radiator. Just as the pen touched the paper, the heavy dining room doors swung open with a resounding crash. Everyone jumped. The capos instinctively reached for the weapons concealed inside their jackets. Leo stood in the doorway. His face was entirely devoid of emotion. In his large, calloused hand, he held a small, delicate glass bottle filled with a fine white powder. "Sorry to interrupt dinner, boss," Leo said, his voice echoing in the sudden dead silence of the room. "But the kid found that item you were looking for." Camilla's face, a blurry pale oval in Aidan's vision, suddenly drained of all color. She instinctively glanced toward the hallway where her purse was kept, then back to Leo, her composure cracking like cheap glass. Aidan didn't sign the paper. He calmly set the gold fountain pen down. The shaking in his hands vanished instantly. He sat up straight, his spine rigid, the posture of a dying man evaporating, to reveal the predator beneath. He looked directly at his wife, not past her, not at a blank spot on the wall. He locked his focus dead center on her terrified face. "Thank you, Leo," Aidan said. His voice was no longer a raspy whisper. It was cold, deep, and resonated with lethal authority. Set the thallium on the table. I believe my wife was just about to explain to our guests exactly what her secret ingredient is. The small glass vial hit the mahogany table with a sharp, dense clink. It rolled a few inches before coming to a rest perfectly between the proxy document and the gold fountain pen. For a span of 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The ambient sounds of the estate, the wind against the glass, the distant hum of the kitchen, seemed to be sucked out of the room, leaving behind a suffocating vacuum. Camilla stared at the vial. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood had entirely abandoned her face, leaving her pristine, manicured features looking like cracked porcelain. "Aiden," she finally managed to choke out. Her voice was a thin, reedy imitation of its usual commanding tone. "What? What is the meaning of this? What is Leo doing?" Aiden did not blink. He kept his gaze locked directly on her eyes. The gray fog that had plagued him for weeks was mostly gone, leaving behind only a slight hazy halo around the edges of his vision. He could see the frantic, microscopic twitch of a muscle beneath her left eye. He could see the sheen of cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. "The meaning is clarity, Camilla," Aiden said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying register that vibrated in the chests of every man at the table. "I thought my eyes were failing me, but it turns out my only blindness was trusting you." He reached out, not with the trembling, hesitant fumble of a blind man, but with swift, brutal precision, and picked up the vial. "Thallium," Aiden said, holding the glass up to the light of the chandelier. "Odorless, tasteless, causes peripheral neuropathy, lethargy, and a very rapid, aggressive degradation of the optic nerve. A rat poison, essentially, administered drop by drop in my tea, my soup, my water." He slowly turned his head to look at Tommy. Tommy was rigid. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. He was staring at Aiden with the expression of a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the ground to hit him. "Boss, Tommy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply. "I don't know what she's been giving you. I swear to God. I'm just here to help with the transition. Like we talked about." "Like we talked about," Aiden repeated softly. He leaned forward, bracing his forearms on the table. "Or like you and Camilla talked about yesterday afternoon in the parlor. Tell me, Tommy, how exactly did you plan to explain my heart giving out tonight? Was it going to be a tragic complication of my illness? The city mourns, and you take over." Tommy flinched as if he had been struck with a baseball bat. The color drained from his face. He instinctively looked at Camilla, a fatal silent confirmation of their guilt. The four capos around the table shifted. The atmosphere in the room violently realigned. Sullivan, the oldest and most dangerous of the four, slowly moved his right hand away from his wine glass and let it drop beneath the table. Carter and Hayes exchanged a dark, knowing glance. Mitchell leaned back, crossing his arms, his eyes fixed on Tommy with predatory disgust. They understood exactly what had just happened. They hadn't been invited to a transition of power. They had been invited to validate an assassination. "Aiden, please!" Camilla suddenly cried out, pushing her chair back and rushing around the table. She dropped to her knees beside his chair, grabbing his forearm. Her tears were instant and practiced. "He's lying. Leo has always hated me. He planted that. He's trying to frame me because I took his position away." Aiden looked down at her. He felt nothing. The agonizing withdrawal, the terror of the creeping dark, the humiliation of having her spoon-feed him while she planned his funeral. It had burned away every ounce of affection he ever held for the woman kneeling at his feet. "You're a phenomenal actress, Cam," Aiden said quietly. He gently but firmly pried her fingers off his suit jacket. "But you made one fundamental error. You forgot that in a house full of thieves and killers, the only people you have to watch out for are the ones who are invisible." He looked toward the open doorway. Leo stepped fully into the room. The toxicologist confirmed it 24 hours ago, boss. And we have the kid's testimony about the purse. We've got the chef in the kitchen ready to swear nobody touched the boss's food but her. Camilla scrambled backward, her heels scraping awkwardly against the hard wood. She looked at Tommy, her mask of devotion shattering into raw, feral panic. "Do something!" she shrieked. "Tommy!" Tommy made his choice. It was the wrong one, driven by the sheer terror of a trapped animal. He lunged backward, his hand darting inside his tailored jacket for his shoulder holster. He didn't even clear the leather. Before Tommy could draw his weapon, Sullivan, a man twice his age, moved with terrifying speed. He kicked his own heavy wooden chair directly into the back of Tommy's knees. As Tommy buckled, Carter reached across the corner of the table, grabbed Tommy by the lapels, and slammed his face downward onto the mahogany wood with a sickening crunch. Silverware clattered to the floor. A wine glass shattered. Carter casually pulled Tommy's weapon from his jacket, checked the safety, and set it next to the thallium vial. Tommy groaned, his nose broken, blood pooling rapidly onto the polished wood. Aiden hadn't moved a muscle. He sat perfectly still, observing the violence with absolute, chilling calm. "John," Aiden said, nodding respectfully to Sullivan. "Thank you for keeping the table clean." "My pleasure, Aiden," Sullivan grunted, righting his chair and sitting back down, uncaring of the bleeding man slumped next to him. "I never liked a man who takes orders from another man's wife anyway." Aiden stood up. He didn't reach for his cane. He didn't stumble. He walked with the heavy, grounded stride of a man who owned the ground he walked on. He rounded the table until he stood over Camilla, who was now trembling violently against the wall. "You took my sight," Aiden said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You stripped my dignity. You thought you could bury me in my own house. But you forgot the cardinal rule of this life, Camilla." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You make sure the king is dead before you try to wear his crown." The dining room doors were pulled shut, leaving the wreckage of the dinner party behind. Aiden walked into his private study, the heavy oak doors closing with a solid, definitive thud. Sullivan, Carter, Hayes, and Mitchell followed him. They took their seats around the room, their postures significantly different than they had been an hour ago. The guarded suspicion was gone, replaced by a profound, sober respect. Aiden hadn't just survived a coup. He had orchestrated a counter-ambush that left his enemies neutralized without him ever having to lift a finger in anger. It was a display of cerebral brutality that the syndicate respected above all else. Aiden walked to his liquor cabinet. He didn't fumble for the bottles. He visually scanned the labels, selected a 20-year-old bourbon, and poured 5 glasses. He handed them out himself. "To clarity," Aiden said, raising his glass. "To clarity," the 4 capos echoed, drinking the amber liquid. Aiden walked behind his desk and sat in his heavy leather chair. The fire in the hearth snapped and hissed. "The transition is canceled," Aiden stated, his tone strictly business. "I am in full control of my faculties. The doctors who corroborated my incurable condition will be dealt with by morning. I will personally review all ledgers, payments, and union negotiations starting tomorrow at 8 a.m. "What about the eastern routes?" Hayes asked, his eyes narrowing. "Tommy authorized a 20% bump to the port authority to keep them quiet. He said you signed off." "I signed off on nothing," Aiden replied coldly. "Stop the payment. If the port commissioner complains, remind him that his brother has a gambling debt with our friends in Atlantic City that we generously bought out. He will honor the original rate, or we collect." Hayes nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. "Consider it done, boss." "Now," Sullivan said, his rough voice scraping the silence, "we have the matter of the garbage in your dining room. How do you want it handled, Aiden? It's a family matter, but it bleeds into our operations. Tommy was an underboss." "Tommy is no longer anything," Aiden said. He stared into his glass, watching the firelight reflect off the bourbon. "Leo and 2 of his men are currently wrapping him up. He broke the fundamental oath. He conspired to kill a sitting boss. You all know the penalty." Nobody spoke. The penalty was absolute. "Take him to the salvage yard," Aiden commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Put him in a crushed car. Let him spend his last hours in the dark, surrounded by metal he can't move, suffocating on his own bad decisions. Let him feel exactly what he tried to do to me." Mitchell swallowed his drink in one gulp. "And the wife?" The room grew distinctly colder. Aiden set his glass down. This was the true test. A boss who couldn't execute his own treacherous wife was a boss who could be manipulated by sentiment. Aiden looked at the men who held his empire together. He knew what they expected. A bullet, a disappearing act, a body in a river. "Camilla," Aiden said softly, "is not getting the mercy of a quick death." The capos leaned in slightly. "Leo's driving her out to the properties we own in the northern Rust Belt. The abandoned ones," Aiden explained, his voice chillingly clinical. "She will be locked in one of the caretaker cabins. No phone, no car. A delivery of basic rations once a week. If she steps off the property, the perimeter guards have orders to shoot on sight. If she tries to contact anyone from her old life, she dies." Aiden paused, letting the reality of the sentence settle over the room. She loved the luxury of this life. She killed for the silk sheets, the jewelry, the power to snap her fingers and make men jump, Aiden continued. She's going to spend the next 40 years staring at peeling wallpaper, eating canned beans, and thinking about the fact that she had the world in her hands and threw it away because she was too impatient. Sullivan let out a low, impressed whistle. Isolation. Solitary confinement for life. That's a cold sentence, Aiden. It's an appropriate one, Aiden said flatly. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. Let the street know. Anyone who aligns with traitors doesn't just die. They cease to exist. Now, gentlemen, if there are no further questions about the stability of this family, get out of my house. I have a syndicate to run. The 4 men stood in unison. There was no hesitation, no sideways glances. Aiden had re-established his dominance not with a hammer, but with a scalpel. They filed out of the study, the heavy doors clicking shut behind them. Aiden was finally alone. He slumped back in his chair, the adrenaline of the evening slowly leaching out of his muscles. The exhaustion was profound, a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the poison and everything to do with the betrayal. He closed his eyes, massaging his temples. He had survived. He had won. But the silence of the massive estate suddenly felt incredibly heavy. A month passed. The first frost of November settled over the city, hardening the ground and stripping the oak trees bare. Inside the Costa estate, the atmosphere had undergone a massive, silent overhaul. The security detail was entirely replaced with Leo's hand-picked men, older, quieter, fiercely loyal enforcers who valued discipline over ambition. The sprawling house was no longer a gilded cage. It was a fortress operating with the precision of a military command center. Aidan sat in his study. The heavy curtains were thrown wide open, flooding the room with crisp, pale morning light. He wasn't wearing sunglasses. He wasn't hiding from the glare. His vision had returned to 95%. The doctors, new, highly vetted specialists flown in from Chicago, had assured him that while there might be minor permanent damage to his peripheral sight, the heavy metal had been purged from his system before it could completely sever the optic nerve. He was at his desk, reading a complex shipping manifest, running his finger down the columns of numbers with effortless speed. The fog was gone. A soft, hesitant knock sounded at the door. "Enter!" Aidan called out, closing the ledger. The door creaked open, and Sarah stepped inside. She looked intensely nervous, wringing her hands in her apron. Since the night of the dinner party, she had walked around the house as if stepping on landmines. She knew enough to understand that the master of the house had executed a ruthless purge, and she lived in constant fear that her association with the former Mrs. Costa would make her collateral damage. "Mr. Costa, sir," Sarah stammered. "You asked to see me?" "I did. Come in, Sarah. Shut the door." She did as she was told, standing rigidly in front of his desk. "I've been reviewing the household payroll," Aidan said, picking up a manila folder. "It seems my former wife was underpaying you significantly for the hours you work, especially considering you were forced to manage the kitchen staff and the cleaning crews almost entirely on your own." Sarah swallowed hard. "I wasn't complaining, sir. I'm grateful for the job. Very grateful." "You shouldn't be grateful for exploitation," Aidan said smoothly. He opened the folder. "I've instructed the accountants to adjust your salary. You are now the head of household staff. Your pay is tripled, retroactive to the day you started. Furthermore, you are off the clock at 5 p.m. every day. The evening staff will handle the rest." Sarah stared at him, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. "Mr. Costa, I don't know what to say. Are you sure? After everything that happened with the lady of the house?" "What happened with my wife was my blind spot, Sarah. Not yours," Aidan said. He pulled a second, thicker document from the folder. "Which brings me to my next point. Where is Mia?" Sarah tensed instantly, the protective mother overriding the terrified employee. "She's in her room, sir, coloring. She knows to stay out of the way. Bring her here." Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, but Aidan's tone brooked no argument. She hurried out of the room. A minute later, she returned, holding the hand of the 6-year-old girl. Mia looked around the grand study, her eyes wide. She looked at Aidan, sitting tall behind his massive desk. "Hi, Mr. Aidan," she said quietly. "Hello, Mia," Aidan replied. He didn't smile. Smiling was a foreign language to him now, but the hard, lethal lines of his face softened imperceptibly. He stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge. He didn't need a cane. "You're not sitting in the dark anymore," Mia observed. "No, I'm not." "The medicine finally worked," Aidan said. He looked at Sarah. "Does she understand what happened that night? With the bottle?" "No, sir," Sarah said quickly, her voice shaking. "I told her Mrs. Costa had to go away on a long trip, and the loud noises were just a broken table. She doesn't know anything about your business." "Keep it that way," Aidan commanded. He looked back down at the little girl. "Mia, you did a job for me. A very important job. Do you remember?" Mia nodded solemnly. "I was a spy. "You were the best spy I've ever employed," Aiden said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a butterscotch candy wrapped in crinkling yellow cellophane. He held it out. Mia took it, her fingers brushing his palm. Aiden turned back to his desk and picked up the thick document. He held it out to Sarah. "This is a trust fund," Aiden explained, his tone strictly professional. "It is fully funded and managed by my private bank. It matures when Mia turns 18. It will cover her college tuition completely at any university she chooses. It will also provide her with a substantial stipend for living expenses until she is 25. Sarah stared at the heavy legal paper as if it were glowing. Her hand shook as she reached out to take it. Tears immediately spilled over her eyelashes. "Mr. Costa, this is a fortune. Why? Why would you do this for us?" Aiden looked at the little girl, who was currently struggling to open the butterscotch wrapper. He thought about the weeks he spent trapped in the gray fog, surrounded by killers who called him boss, and a wife who called him darling, all of them waiting for him to die. He thought about the millions of dollars he paid for security, for loyalty, for information. In the end, none of his wealth, his power, or his terrifying reputation had saved his life. His life was saved by a 6-year-old girl who simply thought medicine wasn't supposed to make you sleepy. Because in my line of work, Sarah, loyalty is bought and truth is negotiated, Aiden said quietly, walking back around his desk to sit in his chair. I was surrounded by people who were paid handsomely to watch my back, and they sold me out for a slightly larger cut. Mia gave me the truth, and she didn't ask for a dime. He picked up his pen, signaling that the meeting was over. "Make sure she studies hard, Sarah. She's too smart to end up in a world like mine." Sarah wiped her face, clutching the trust document to her chest. "I will, sir, I promise. Thank you. Thank you so much." She took Mia's hand and led her toward the door. Just before they stepped out, Mia turned back. "Bye, Mr. Aiden," she said. "Goodbye, Mia." The heavy oak doors clicked shut. Aiden Costa sat alone in his bright, sunlit study. He reached into his desk drawer where he kept his pens and wax seals and looked at a small, strange collection he had started. Pushed to the back of the drawer were 4 empty, crumpled yellow cellophane wrappers. He closed the drawer. He opened his ledgers. He had his eyes back. He had his empire back. But he knew, with the cold, permanent certainty of a man who had survived the absolute dark, that he would never truly look at the world the same way again. Sight was a mechanical function of the body. But seeing who people truly were, that was a survival skill. And Aiden Costa would never be blind again. Aiden's descent into darkness almost cost him his empire. But a child's simple honesty proved far more powerful than a syndicate's betrayal. He learned the hardest lesson of all. True vision isn't just about opening your eyes. It's about seeing exactly who is standing in the shadows. Thank you for listening to the full story of You're Not Blind, Your Wife is Spiking Your Food. If Aiden's cold, calculated comeback kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more gritty audio dramas. See you next time.